John DiNardo. Welcome back to Late Night in the Midlands.
Hello, Michael. I am pleased to be with you and your audience.
Well, I'm pleased to have you back. And, you know, I have certain guests who I try to get back as often as I can because, you know, I know you take your research serious, and therefore I take it serious, and I thank you.
You're welcome.
And so we've got these crazy weather patterns going on right now. I don't know where you would actually like to start.
Well, weather is a good place to start. I mean, that's some down-to-earth, pardon the pun, evidence of that something is definitely wrong with planet Earth. We see it in all sorts of weather phenomena, weather disasters, extreme cases of snow, heavy snow, record-breaking snow, in fact, and record-breaking cold. Particularly in the South, which has never in our memorable history experienced such cold weather. The South has been devastated because they never have such cold, icy, snowy weather, and the roads. The proof is that they don't have the salt trucks, they don't have the equipment to deal with this as the northern states do, and that's why the South has been particularly devastated. So there's evidence right there of historic, epic snow, cold, ice, etc. That has never occurred before. It's happening closer and closer to the equator. So Earth is in trouble. We look at floods. We've seen entire nations. I know it's easy to forget some of these disasters because they're not really highly publicized in the mass media. But if you look back, you'll recall that the entire nation of Pakistan was flooded out a few years ago. Virtually the entire nation was flooded out. And the entire nation of Australia, the continent, much of that was flooded out just a few years ago. We had floods all over the United States, and I know that people who live in those regions will never forget them. The epic floods in Texas, when Texas was basically floating away. Washington State, Louisville, Kentucky got flooded out very badly several times. Nashville, Grand Ole Opry was damaged heavily. Floods in every portion of the United States, really.
Oh yeah,
storms, hurricanes that are huge, massive, large area hurricanes like Irene and Sandy. Typically, hurricanes cover a small area.
Look at the Philippines.
Like
Look at the Philippines. What was that? 233 mile an hour winds.
Yeah, I mean over 200 miles an hour. I mean that has never been recorded before. So the weather itself is proving that something is wrong with planet Earth because this has never happened before. We could go on and on. We could talk about, as you say, the winds, the drought, record droughts. I mean, I remember, I followed the Weather Channel quite a bit. Homes were so dry that the ground was cracking and the foundations of the houses were being destroyed because the ground was getting so dry, cracking and separating.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. And here we've got we're about to get hit with an ice storm here in Columbia, South Carolina. So you know they're putting warnings out about power outages, and so preparing for that.
Right, and this is one reason we're seeing the reality of it hit home. We're feeling the pain of it. People in the South are going to have to deal with power outages. People up in where I live in New Jersey may very well have power outages due to the ice buildup on the trees and on the power lines, and then the winds too. So when you have ice buildup and you have winds, that's when power lines come down, and it could be for a long period of time. In fact, the Weather Channel is warning that these power outages may last a long time. So when you feel the pain of it, it's not so easy to dismiss the threat or the reality that Earth is in trouble. It's quite easy to dismiss it when everything is going fine. But when you see the reality of the pain that's hitting us from all these weather disasters, then you begin to realize that, hey, it's time to wake up, time to get in motion, and time to prepare. That's my whole purpose, is trying to get people to prepare. I mean, why would I want to scare people just for the sake of scaring them? People watch horror movies for that reason, to be scared because they enjoy it. But that's not my purpose. That's not our purpose. We want to warn people. We care about people. Care about people protecting their lives and saving their lives. And that's why now they're beginning to realize that, yes, they have to get backup generators. They have to get solar panels. They have to start buying food, canned food. I mean, I've been stocking up, fortunately, before Fukushima's nuclear disaster in Japan, I had stocked up on sardines and salmon. And so that's non-radioactive sardines and salmon, and the dates are still good.
Yeah.
Still, within the period of freshness where they're not expiring yet. So I was lucky. Same thing with, you can get cans of Vienna sausages, and I have a bunch of those in the basement too, and cans of white meat chicken. Well, that's the kind of the protein that people will need when things start going, and mainly it's the power. When the power goes, that's when the stores get cleaned out, and everything, our fragile infrastructure, our web-like infrastructure of computers and delivery systems, just-in-time delivery systems, becomes disabled, actually. And nothing can be delivered to the stores. I mean, I was just watching the Weather Channel today. They showed a photograph of these huge long supermarket shelves cleaned out just from this one winter storm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, that's what happens here, is as soon as there's any mention of a snow flurry going to be in the air, and good luck finding bread or milk on any shelf.
Right, so that's why now, when there's no disaster, you've got to start buying dried. What I buy is amaranth. Amaranth is a wonderful grain from Peru, ancient grain from Peru, and that happens to be complete protein. You can get bags of dried amaranth. It's sort of like small beads, and not only amaranth, but there's dried millet and dried barley, dried lentils, dried split peas, very low cost, and those can be soaked for a period of time, and they get softened up without heat, partially softened anyway, so you can save fuel by soaking these grains and legumes in water for 12 or 15 hours. That's the kind of thing we have to start planning for. Plus, sprouting seeds. I sprout seeds in a big jar. It's very easy to do. And the seed sprouts contain all the enzymes that the body needs to break down the foods and to digest them. Our bodies are depleted of enzymes because of our modern day false food that we're eating. So that's why our bodies cannot assimilate the carbohydrates and proteins and fats that we need to in order to keep the body strong and active. So these are all the things we have to start doing.
Yeah, there's so many chemicals that are added to the food. It's ridiculous. I was just talking about this last night with Autumn, and I was telling her, it's like, if you're going to a regular grocery store, practically everything you're getting has got chemicals, preservatives, and all this, processed crap. And, and then we wonder why there's such an epidemic with cancers and different diseases. It's all this poison that's being put in the food. So I would suggest people to, get as pure as they can of whatever they're going to store, for sure. I mean, naturally, if you're starving, you're not going to complain that if you have a can of Chef Boyardee, but
right.
So,
but you're right. You go for the basic foods that I've been mentioning, because they have not been tampered with. Grains, dried legumes, and Vienna sausages. I mean, it doesn't come from the best, meat sources, and canned chicken may not be from the best chicken
better
farms,
than nothing.
But at least it's protein that'll keep you going. But you also supplement that with good vegetable protein also that is pure, because it's basic grains and legumes that haven't been damaged by man's processing.
Wouldn't be a bad idea for people to store seeds as well while they're still natural before Monsanto has all his, everything flipped over. Wouldn't be.
That's right. You can go to the internet and look for heirloom seeds. Look for that word heirloom, Heirloom seeds. Those are non-GMO, and I keep them in a refrigerator, not in a freezer. I would not freeze seeds, but keeping them sealed real well in a refrigerator is a good thing to do. So there are many things. Of course, even more important than food would be water. Mm-hmm. You cannot survive very long without water. And again, I have stored many empty bottles over the years, plastic bottles. I don't like plastic, but it's the only thing you can get, basically, and that's what you could survive on it. And you can even filter the bottled water that's been sitting in plastic bottles like for 5, 6, 7 years that I've had, sitting in these plastic bottles stacked up. And you could pour them through a gravity filter, such as a Berkeley ceramic filter, and then pour through a carbon, these countertop carbon filters. So, and even if you drink it out of the bottle, I mean, it's not the best, but it'll keep you alive. So water is extremely important. Say, I would go to the recycling places and start getting bottles from them, because it would take you too long to collect bottles. There may be a disaster looming very soon, so you want to go to a recycling center and see if they'll give you a whole, fill up your car and your trunk with empty plastic bottles.
See, and I'll save like the old milk gallons. I don't drink milk myself, but others in the home do. So, I'll save those. I'll wash them out, save them, and put water in them.
That's right. It's a smart thing to do. Well, anyway, so there's a lot to talk about regarding survival. People who live in areas that many people are living in areas that will be flooded out. So think of what you can do. Get a rubber raft. Look on the internet. Look for very inexpensive flotation devices. And also emergency. What do they call these? Life vests and life jackets.
Yeah.
You could even have it in your car. See, if many cars get flooded out because they get caught in, and it's impossible to, even if you're safety minded, sometimes it's impossible to avoid flash floods. Your car gets instantly stuck in the middle of a flash flood.
I have never been in one yet, but I'm in a good place for that to happen. And it's not happened yet, thank God. But
do some reading on the internet, find out what you could do. I know some people carry life vests in their cars, and
that's a great idea. That's a great idea, actually, John. And I've never even thought about that, keeping a life vest in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
They're rather compact, I think, and you just pull a cord and it fills up with CO2 or air. Could be a lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely can. Now, when we talk about the weather and how it's gone crazy, I mean, there's no question in the world that fashions haven't been tampering with geoengineering, and we know that certainly is a big part of it. But how much, in your opinion or in your research, has that factored in to the craziness we're seeing on this planet, and how much of it is off planet?
I've been faced with that question over the past several years as to who's causing or what's causing all this crazy severe weather. Is it man or is it God? And I've come to the conclusion, if you, spiritually speaking, when you pray and you study pray God's scriptures, not just study, because man cannot understand the symbolic mysteries of the Bible. But when you study, you realize that Satan is a real being, and the New World Order absolutely believes that Satan is their God. I mean, this is what they've stated in their books, that the Freemasons the Illuminati, all the people who rule the world, that they get their power from Satan, who is the temporary ruler of this world. So if they believe that he exists, and the Bible tells us, and Jesus tells us that he does indeed exist, then you can realize that there's a battle going on between God and between Satan. And the men who manage and control the HARP experiments, HARP instrumentation and weaponry, scalar devices, all those kind of high technology weapons and equipment, those men are tempting, I believe, tend to trigger some of these natural disasters that are all ready to occur. And the way I analogize it is I often say that these disasters, well, Planet X is like Batman, and man's HARP disasters are like Robin. So yeah, man is a minimal, weak trigger for some of the natural disasters that are already developing. Satan wants to take Robin, that Satan wants to take the credit for what Batman is really doing.
Yeah.
What Planet X is doing to this Earth.
And I just wanted to say that, and with some of the higher uppers, when you get up to that top level of control, I mean, these people literally believe that they're going to become God by controlling the people, the weather, everything. Yeah.
Transhumanism, right? Yeah. That there's a lot of talk about their transhumanist agenda, where they expect to live forever. And of course, this is part of the duel between God and Satan. God tells us that through his sacrifice that we can live forever. And Satan has given us a counterfeit promise that we can live forever through transhumanism. So it's all part of the dual battle between God and Satan. And it's the same thing with these natural disasters. Why would the New World Order want to take credit for all these disasters by giving us reason to believe that it was HARP that caused this earthquake or that earthquake? Because as long as we the people fear HARP and the government and the New World Order and the Illuminati, we will remain subservient to them and obedient. But once we realize that it's God bringing in Planet X, then people will will fear God and turn their allegiance to God. Satan fears that. Satan hates that. So Satan wants to deceive us with the belief, and we know he is a great deceiver, and his men who rule the world from the pinnacle of the pyramid of power want to trick the world into believing that they have all the power to create these disasters. In fact, I just realized there's a parallel in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus, from the Israelites represent the people who believed, who are true believers. And today, they were just a picture, the Israelites were just a portrait or a representation of the people that God has empowered with faith today. And those people that he has empowered with faith today are spiritual Israel. And they're all over the world. There's some in Nigeria and some in the United States. They don't happen, some of them are Jewish, but many are of all different nationalities, races. And they're a minority, actually, in each race and each nation who believe, been chosen by God to believe in God. And that's what the Israelites of ancient Egypt represented, the future spiritual believers, which are us. Well, in those days, Pharaoh represented, in the book of Exodus, Pharaoh represented Satan, who dominated and enslaved the Israelites. Well, we are similarly, parallelly, being dominated and enslaved by Pharaoh, who is the New World Order, and will become the Antichrist soon. The Antichrist will emerge. And so you see the parallels there. Pharaoh's Egypt had them enslaved, working to build a great empire, the Egyptian empire. And the same thing is happening here. They keep us so busy that we cannot worship God and be devoted to God in the book of Exodus. God spoke to Moses and told him, tell Pharaoh that I will hammer him with one disaster after another until he lets my people go into the wilderness so that they can worship me and not him. This was God's purpose, and God is doing the same thing right now. So the book of Revelation is the ancient book of Exodus, deja vu, all over again.
And what I see is, like when it comes to these control freaks who are at the buttons and switches for us here, I see a bunch of guys who are really men and women, I should say, who are role playing. It's like they want to be that all powerful Antichrist, and it's like they're taking every step necessary to be that. And I'll say this, whether people believe that there's a Satan or not, or a devil or whatever you want to call him, one thing for myself I can't deny is that there has been real cases of demonic possession. And so there is an evil on the other side that is willing to take over your body, is willing to just really put people through hell, to say it lightly. I mean, I know of a couple cases that were absolutely real. The woman wasn't nuts. She wasn't losing her mind. She wasn't on any crazy drugs. There was demonic activity in her home, and she had become possessed. And so you got to wonder, if you don't believe in a devil, you got to believe in that evil, because these things come from somewhere.
Well, just look at the evil that these men are perpetrating, the men in power. It's far greater and far more sophisticated than you would think that any human being could have. And the plan that they have is the plan for world enslavement is so multifaceted, every front: education, the monetary system, the political system, the television, the brainwashing, mind control. All of this is such a highly complex system that you could say, well, yeah, these men were brilliant. But these men, again, they openly tell you that they worship Satan as their God. This is their declaration in their landmark book, Morals and Dogma, by Albert Pike. And Albert Pike was the grand sovereign commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry back in the 19th century. And they all follow that. And Skull and Bones Society, secret society, is an American branch of Freemasonry. So Skull and Bones is basically subservient to all of the principles, the teachings of Albert Pike in his book, Morals and Dogma. In that book, they state, we worship Satan as God. They call him Lucifer, but that's a nice name for Satan, which means the adversary in Hebrew.
Yeah.
Well, we know they exist, and if there's a Satan, then there's a God too. We could go on and on with the theology, but that's all related to Planet X, I'm quite sure. For example, the comets that cause, we could get into the physics of what a comet does and how it caused these natural disasters on Earth that's recorded in the book of Exodus. And we could see that the comets were actually stated in the Bible as being angels of God. That's kind of hard to understand. But there's a supernatural transformation there where an angel actually becomes a comet or Planet X. And the physical effects are an electrical discharge. The comets are engulfed in plasma. This plasma is nothing more than hydrogen ions, positive, electrically positive charged hydrogen ions, which encircle the entire vast outer sphere of our solar system. And when these comets come in from deep space, they become saturated with this plasma as they enter into that big plasma bubble. And it's a electrically sticky bubble, just like a bee. Imagine a bee flying into a huge bubblegum bubble.
Yeah.
The bee is going to pick up all that, be engulfed with bubblegum and pull a long bubblegum tail behind it. And as the bee flies deeper and deeper toward the center of that huge bubble, what's happening is that the bubble gum trail that it's pulling becomes more and more stretched until it snaps and breaks free from the bubble. And when it snaps, what does it form? A ripple, right? Take a long rubber band and pull it real tight, stretch it way out and release it. Or if it breaks, it will sort of ripple very, very, rapidly in a fraction of a second. Well, that's an analogy that pretty closely defines what happens to these electrified plasma saturated comets as they pass into our solar system. And they've been observed as these ripply, dragon-like, roller coaster-like red objects in the sky. Some of the accounts given by ancient historians, as I recall, are something like, it looked like a red, fiery coil in the sky with a tail that was, spiraling like a coil. And the Chinese cultures from ancient Chinese cultures recorded it as a serpent in the sky. And when you see the Chinese on Chinese New Year's every year, they do the dragon dance. That dragon dance is a legend, actually a saga in choreography, and dance choreography, telling the story of what the ancient Chinese civilizations witnessed when this comet came in. The dragon that is a long tunnel-like fabric that men get into, and they follow in a long trail in a single file behind one another. Then they pop up and down to represent or a pictorial display of a roller coaster like spiraling dragon in the sky. So there you have history or legends being recited or being delivered in a dance type choreography. It's amazing. The Thunderbird, for example, the Thunderbird of the American Indians in the Southwest was actually a representation of a comets that came in. This was all the same events when Earth underwent great disasters. These comets are, again, plasma-drenched objects. When they get close to the sun, they begin to stimulate the sun electrically because they're positively charged, and the sun's space charge surrounding the sun is primarily electrons negatively charged. So the negative and positive begin to interact and attract one another. The sun begins to discharge, and when it does, it flares, and when the sun flares, it blows out these huge solar winds, which shoot out in waves in all directions, striking the comet, the incoming comet, causing the plasma saturated the coma of the comet to stretch out laterally so that you have what looks like a winged globe. And this winged globe has been described in so many ancient cultures. The Hittites, the Babylonians, they all talk about this winged globe. And I even have a doc in Zechariah Sitchin's landmark book, The 12th Planet.
Now, let me ask you this. Could it be, when they talk about this winged planet, I mean, could it possibly have been some huge ship that came, and that's why they claim that Anunnaki? I'm just asking. I don't know. No, actually, the winged globe, I can show you proof that it is a natural phenomenon of electricity and magnetism. When you look at some of the pictures that have been taken from the Soho satellite, which sits out in space and photographs the sun constantly, you'll see some of these winged globes. It looks like flying saucers that are getting close to the sun. Well, there's that natural phenomenon where the solar winds blowing out, striking the plasma, cause the plasma, because you have an attraction and a attraction between negative and positive,
And the electrons, of course, are also in the solar wind, so they would repel. They would attract, whereas some of the protons are also being blown out would repel the protons from the comet. And the end effect, and James McCanny, I think, has attempted to show how this electrical interaction would cause wings to spread out from the comet. I haven't taken a look at it, but I can analyze it myself and see that how this would happen with the electrical interaction between opposite and like charges, actually, that are both being blown out by the sun, interacting with the comet. So the effect is, and it's been the ancients noticed it, coming over Earth when the comets were really huge. And we're seeing it now with these comets that are crashing or grazing the sun or going close to the sun or crashing into the sun. We're seeing the winged globe effect. But this winged globe was huge in ancient times because it scared those people, civilizations of the world were terrified. And great natural disasters were occurring when these comets, huge comets, came by. We today have never experienced such a flyby of massive comets. If we did, we would have had earthquakes all over the world at the same time, and we would have had electrical discharge. But the ancients did experience the peak of the catastrophe, of the celestial catastrophe, and that's why they worshipped. They literally worshipped this in fear, thinking that it was a god. And of course, God is bringing it in to make people fear. They have the Zechariah Sitchin, I could read from his book, but I'll just paraphrase from his book, The 12th Planet, where he says the ancient civilizations worshipped that symbol. They had that symbol all over their buildings. It was a winged globe, and it was a symbol on cylinder seals, inside temples, everywhere. The archaeologists have been doing digs. They found this winged globe, a great symbol of honor, fear, terror, and worship. And that's what we also take a look at. This is amazing how this symbol has carried over from ancient times even into today. But it's esoteric. It's mysterious. It's not really described. But look at the United States Air Force insignia symbol. That's a winged globe. Look at the Chrysler Corporation, Chrysler logo. That's a winged globe. Look at the Toyota logo on a car when you happen to see a Toyota in front of you. That's a winged globe.
That's true.
In many cases. Well, anyway, that's what we're going to have to look forward to. What we're seeing now in the SOHO satellite, these little winged globes that people think are flying saucers or little spaceships, are really nothing more. It's a natural phenomenon of electricity and magnetism. And that's what happened in the past. That's why they saw the Thunderbird. Zechariah Sitchin has numerous drawings. One drawing from each of the civilizations that witnessed it. Now, the drawings all had something in common. They all looked like an eagle, sort of like an eagle flying straight toward you, if you can visualize that, coming right at you with the wings outstretched and the head appearing in the center as a circular object. And there were variations on it. Some of the civilizations drew their winged globe with feet coming down from it, the feet of the bird. That's the Thunderbird. And the reason the feet occur is because when the comet gets close enough to planet Earth is electrical ground or electrically neutral. Earth is a great source of electrons. We've all heard the term Earth ground. And that's why they ground electrical systems deep into the ground, because the Earth is a copious source of electrons. Well, these protons are positive, the protons that saturate the incoming comet. And when the comet gets close enough, proximity is the main factor in causing an electrical discharge between two oppositely charged objects, proximity. So when they get close enough, that's when the discharging occurs. So now the winged globe is not only a winged globe, but a winged globe with a long vertical column discharging down to the earth, causing destruction as it discharges like a welder's torch. And that then becomes a cross. Right, huge, red, glowing cross in the sky. And this is what Jesus prophesied, that you will see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Now, what's the sign of the Son of Man? What's the sign of Jesus? Everybody knows really what it is. It's a cross. And he's telling us that we're going to see a cross in the sky coming with great power and glory.
And you know, it's funny, I was just looking before the show, somebody had sent me pictures, and it showed a comet coming in. And the comet, they actually outlined it, and it was shaped like a cross.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a winged globe for sure. As it gets closer to the sun, the wings, the outstretched arms of the Savior on the cross, or the wings on that globe will become more and more prominent as it gets closer to the sun, because you have it. Again, proximity is the most important factor in electrical interaction between opposite charges and between like charges. So that's why the wings spread out more and more. Incidentally, if you go to the book of Exodus, this is really amazing. In the book of Exodus, God tells Moses that I'm going to send a destroyer over tonight, passing over. That's how the term Passover came about. I'm going to send a destroyer, and he will pass over you and not destroy you, yet he will destroy those in Egypt who fail to take the warning.
You're a little low, John. If you can, I don't know if you. There
okay.
You are. There you
Did
are.
you check your volume? Because I seem to be shouting into the phone. I hope you set your volume okay.
Oh yeah, actually I have. I have actually got it turned up a bit, because I don't know if you might be moving the phone just away from your mouth a little bit. I don't know, but you sound good now.
Thanks for telling me.
Thank you.
They were told by God. God told Moses to tell your people to take the sacrificial lamb, which is a symbolic representation of the coming Jesus, the sacrifice for sin for all mankind. Take that sacrificial lamb, kill the lamb, take the blood from the lamb, and this is for the ancient Israelites now. This is a Jewish holiday, or not just Jewish, but Israelite holiday. And take the blood from the lamb and stroke it on the doors of your houses, of the Israelites' slaves' houses. Put one stroke of blood across the left side of the door, another stroke of blood across the right side of the door, and another stroke of blood on top of the door. And that symbolizes the wings, the two side wings, and the head of the globe. And when that destroyer passes over, God told Moses, your house will be protected. This destroyer will pass over you without damaging you. And God told Moses that this shall be a holiday or memorial for your people forevermore. Tell this to generation after generation. And that's why we have the Passover every April. Well, anyway, getting back to the science behind it, the U.S. government acknowledged discovering this huge planet, and this was an article in the New York Times. I'm not going to go into it, except maybe to read a few brief passages. But think about this. 31 years ago, there's an article from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983. The title was Clues Get Warm in the Search for Planet X by John Noble Wilford. And I'll just read the first paragraph.
Okay.
Something out there beyond the farthest reaches of the known solar system seems to be tugging at Uranus and Neptune. Some gravitational force keeps perturbing the two giant planets, causing irregularities in their orbits. The force suggests a presence far away and unseen, a large object that may be the long-sought Planet X. So they're saying that it's been sought for a long time. And I'll abbreviate the article by saying that the reason it was sought for a long time was that ever since the early 1800s, even the astronomers then, like 200 years ago, noticed that the outer planets Uranus and Neptune had perturbations in their orbital travel. That is, a little jog or dip or excursion out of their normal orbit that was irregular, and there was no reason why that would happen in terms of the physics of motion, except that some gravitational body was out there, and in that particular place beyond their orbit, whenever that planet went around, made a huge circle around the sun in its revolution, it would be pulled out of its orbit by the rather close proximity of this huge body. And then it would return, after it passed by this huge body, it would return back to its normal orbital path. So the orbit then would be perturbed or stretched out a little bit at one particular point in an irregularity in its circular motion. Okay, am I speaking loud enough? I hope so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're doing
okay.
fine.
And this is how they knew. Going back 200 years, the 1830s, they noticed this. So that's why the article says this has been long sought Planet X. They didn't see it, but they saw its gravitational effects, and they figure this thing must be huge, must be so great, because, the larger a body, the stronger its gravitational pull. And this object must have been way, way out there, but yet, even though it was a great distance out, like a magnet, like a powerful magnet, you can move it far away from a ball bearing. But if the magnet is strong enough, it'll cause that ball bearing to roll toward the magnet. So if the stronger the magnet, or the larger the gravitational body, the greater its ability to attract another object at a great distance away. So that's what they knew. They knew this thing was huge. And they even began to look for it in the early 1900s, 1910. A famous astronomer named Percival Lowell constructed the Lowell Observatory in Arizona, and just to dedicated solely to look for Planet X. And that's how the name Planet X came about. It was given to it by the famous astronomer Percival Lowell in the early 1900s. And then the government, NASA, began looking for it. They had a secret document titled The Search for Planet X. This was in the late 70s.
And is there a way, not to interrupt, but I'm curious, is there a way to get one's hands on that document still today?
I think that's on the internet. I know James McCanney mentioned that NASA has an internal document. Of course, it's supposed to be secret, but somehow it got on the internet. And I have James McCanney on tape for going back 12 years or so, where he mentioned on a radio show that, the government NASA has an internal document titled The Search for Planet X. And so they know it exists. Don't let them tell you that it doesn't, because they're lying. They've been searching for it themselves secretly. They sent up and this is well known too, I bet the New York Times article, where they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probes. I've had the article right in front of me, but for the sake of saving time, I mean, these are actual photocopies of the New York Times articles that I'm reading to you. So if anybody wants to see the proof that I'm paraphrasing, it's right. I can send you clear pictures of the actual New York Times article, 1982, 1983. The 1982 New York Times stated that they sent up the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probe. The Pioneer 10 is really the one that they were looking at. And that was designed to go close to where they had calculated this object Planet X was located, close to it, hoping that when it got close enough that this Pioneer 10 space probe would be gravitationally pulled off of its trajectory as it passed the point where they calculated this Planet X was located. If it was pulled off its trajectory, that would prove that this huge gravitational body was there pulling the Pioneer 10 space probe off its trajectory. And sure enough, it did. I cannot find, or I haven't really searched out the proof that it actually was pulled off of its trajectory, but all the researchers tell us that it was, and they were satisfied with it. And in fact, I think now that I realize there is proof in the fact that NASA sent up more space telescopes to further verify what the Pioneer 10 had already verified, that indeed its trajectory had been pulled slightly, deviated slightly by the gravitational pull of Planet X. And the following year, after 1982, 79 was the year. 1979 was the year they sent up the Pioneer 10 space probe. It took a few years to get way, way out there beyond Pluto, and where Planet X was located, and get pulled off of its trajectory. And in 1983, they sent up the infrared astronomical satellite. That's what this New York Times article is talking about. It focuses on the infrared astronomical satellite. In fact, this January 1983 New York Times article that I'm holding in my hand has a picture of the infrared astronomical satellite. It says U.S., as I'm reading here, U.S. and Dutch technicians are preparing the infrared astronomical satellite before its launch last week. This is from United Press International. And last week was the week before the article was written, which was January 30th. So it was launched in January of 1983. Then it went up and it did all of this infrared telescope orbited around the pole, the south pole of planet Earth, way, way up above the clouds where there was no obstacles, no obstruction to its view, and it was infrared specifically because this object, being a brown dwarf, what they believe to be a brown dwarf star, does not emit visible light. It emits only infrared light. It's a slow, smoldering brown dwarf star, a star that not a baby star. It didn't quite get big enough to light up like and ignite like our sun is a huge adult star, but this is a baby star. And those brown dwarf stars are quite common in the universe. This one, they emit only infrared light because they're not large enough to go into nuclear fusion and emit various wavelengths, the entire spectrum of light, just the infrared. So that's what the infrared astronomical satellite was designed to do. And indeed, that infrared satellite did spot, sight, and photograph Planet X. I've got the article in front of me. After the New York Times, the January 1983 New York Times article heralded the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite, 11 months later, 11 months after January 1983, in December 83, the Washington Post front page article heralded the discovery of Planet X, but then they didn't call it Planet X. They just said, "Wow, we found this huge body." And I'll read you the article, the actual article that I photocopied from the microfilm archives at my county library. Front page, Washington Post, December 30th, 1983. Article titled, "Possibly as Large as Jupiter, a Mystery Heavenly Body Discovered," by Thomas O'Toole, Washington Post staff writer. Quote, "A heavenly body, possibly as large as the giant planet Jupiter, and possibly so close to Earth that it would be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. infrared astronomical satellite." Now here's where they're told by our wonderful domineering National Security Agency, which controls, the NSA controls all of the government agencies, even the CIA they control. Here's where they were told to sort of cover up some of the details because they didn't want to panic the people. They say, "So mysterious is this object that astronomers do not know if it is a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar. A protostar would be a star that's beginning to form, that never got hot enough to become a star. They don't know whether it's a distant galaxy so young that it's still in the process of forming its first stars, or a galaxy so shrouded in dust that none of the light cast by its stars ever gets through. See, this is all a bunch of nonsense that they added in there to cover up the fact that if they know what it is, they dedicated the infrared astronomical satellite to finding Planet X, the brown dwarf, which they call the brown dwarf star, in January, and now they're lying about something that they publicly announced to the world in the New York Times 11 months earlier. And they must think we're really stupid.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that they were looking for it, and I know about these articles that came out in the newspaper about them finding it. Now, has anybody confronted them with these articles and said, well, then what the hell is this, if you don't know what we're talking about?
If you ever did, they would never respond. That's guaranteed. But we're bringing truth out. I'm bringing it out. Mark Hazelwood brought it out in his book, Blindsided, about 13 years ago. And of course, Mark did not have the actual photocopies of the articles. He just had transcripts of them. But he said, yeah, they lied about it. And they try to say, oh, we don't know what this thing is. But actually, if the National Security Agency had really been on their toes and alert, they would have said, don't even report it at all. Do not mention this thing at all. Well, they got by them. At that time, they were not that quite alert to it. And the Washington Post put the information out. Why? Because NASA was really pleased. The scientists at NASA were thrilled. This was a great discovery, and they wanted to tell the world about it. Of course, they were just scientists trying to be honest. But they didn't know that there was a power elite controlling them and were lying to the people. Quick. So they had to obey their ruler, their non-scientific evil rulers. And we know the NSA is evil. We see what they're doing today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, John, let's take a break. This is a good spot to stop for a minute, take a break, and we'll come back. And I want to talk more about the evidence of this object because it's disputed. There's people who, they've heard people cry wolf so many times that they don't even want to hear it no more. But then you bring up some really good points, and one of them is that newspaper article. So we'll get back to that as soon as we come back. Folks, this is Late Night in the Midlands. DiNardo, and, he explains this so well. It's just, when I have a guest like this, I just want to listen. I try not to break in unless I have a question. And if you have a question, you're welcome to break in as well. 803-317-2264. You can also call in using Skype. Our ID is Late Night in the Midlands, no spaces. And if you're listening on the Dark Matter Radio Network, again, it's recorded for you, so don't call in. And John, well, we're back, and I am fascinated, and I haven't given it a whole lot of thought, but when you bring up this newspaper article, that it is very real. There was other ones, too, wasn't there? Other articles that came out before they hushed everybody up?
Yes. The subject was made taboo and forbidden by the National Security Agency back in 1983 after the New York Times heralded the discovery of this object, but a couple of articles did slip out, and then nothing was said afterward that I can find, perhaps in some other publications, but it's been essentially kept secret for 31 years. Now, there's proof right there. Just think about this. The largest object, and I'm going to tell you how of magnitude of this discovery is the greatest astronomical discovery in the modern history of the world. And to show you how important and paramount this discovery is, I'll just read a little bit more of the landmark Washington Post front page article, December 30th, 1983, which I just began to read. And it goes on to say that, quote, the most fascinating explanation of this mystery body, which is so cold that it casts no light, and that's why they need an infrared telescope, so cold that it casts no light, the explanation of what it is has never been seen by optical telescopes on Earth or in space. Their most, I'm cutting in with my own commentary here, is that the explanation is that it is a giant gaseous planet. This is all quotes from the article. A giant gaseous planet as large as Jupiter and as close to Earth as 50 billion miles. While that may seem like a great distance in earthbound terms, it is a stone's throw in cosmological terms. So close, in fact, that it would be the nearest heavenly body to Earth beyond the outermost planet, Pluto. If it is really that close, it would be a part of our solar system, said Dr. James Houck, H-O-U-C-K, of Cornell University Center for Radio Physics. So they're saying this object is so close that it's actually considered to be a part of our solar system. Now here you have an object. We know that Jupiter is the giant of our solar system by a large degree. And yet this object is a brown dwarf star, which is defined as being, brown dwarf stars are larger than Jupiter.
Yeah,
so
and
this object would have to be, it's so close it would have to be a member of our solar system. That's how important, astronomically important, this object is.
And why
and
so
yet,
cold?
It was covered up for 31 years.
Right, and why is it so cold? Some people have speculated that there could be life on this planet, but if it's that cold, how could there be?
Well, it's like saying there could be life on Jupiter. No way.
Yeah.
See, it's a gas giant. These brown dwarf stars, and Jupiter is almost a brown dwarf star itself.
Yeah.
We can learn a lot about Planet X by just studying Jupiter. Jupiter is a gas giant, just like Uranus and Neptune. And that means it's not dense like our Earth is, because a star, as you know, just like our sun, doesn't have the great density that Earth doesn't have the land masses that Earth has, but it's more ethereal, composed of gases like clouds, of various gases, just like our sun. And that's why it's impossible for life as we know it to exist there. The temperatures are extremely hot, even though they say it's cold. It's really has its own heat source internal furnace, and it would destroy. No life could exist because of the atmosphere, and because there's nothing to stand on, really.
Right, and
go ahead.
I just wanted to say also that now they've been covering this up for 31 years, and that's where that planet was 31 years ago, I guess. But 31 years have passed, so where is it now?
Well, just imagine this. Now, this is all basic physics, which I used to teach, and anyone can learn it by getting a college physics textbook from their local library. There's a gravitational pull between our sun and objects surrounding our sun, as we know. Now, what is the mass? What is the magnitude of the gravitational pull of our sun? It's tremendous. It's hard to even visualize how great the gravitational pull of our sun is. But I'll tell you what the mass is estimated as: nearly 1/3 of a million Earths. That's the mass of our sun. Not that our sun is as dense as our Earth, but it is so large that its total mass throughout its entire huge volume, its total mass is equal to the mass of 1/3 of a million Earths. So you can imagine with a mass that great as our sun has, the sun would be a tremendous gravitational magnet, so to speak, pulling objects around it. And the reason it doesn't pull Mercury into it, Mercury doesn't crash into the sun, the reason that Venus doesn't crash into the sun, and the reason Earth and all the other planets do not crash into the sun, is that there's a counterbalancing force, a centrifugal, the word fugal being derived from the word fugitive or fleeing from the center force, centrifugal force, which we experience that centrifugal force when we make a left turn in our cars. We tend to slide to the right, or when we make a right turn, we tend to slide to the left. Well, that's the centrifugal force that counteracts the centripetal or center-seeking force, center-pulling force that the sun exerts on the planet. So when those two forces, the centripetal force on the orbiting planet is counterbalanced by the centrifugal force of that orbiting planet, then the planet remains in a at a fixed distance orbiting the sun. Otherwise, it will get pulled in. But take an object that happens to be passing by or being pulled in by the sun. It's not on a circular orbit. It's on maybe an elliptical orbit, which is pretty much approximates a straight line in some sections because it's such a long stretched elliptical orbit. Now it cannot revolve around the sun. Therefore, it must come zooming in toward the sun, and that's where the great danger is. It's like you have these, if you were to have runners on a track, Olympic runners, and you had a series of concentric tracks, one track within another, all the runners are on their own track, and they are safely passing one another without colliding into one another, because each one has a separate orbital track, just like our planets have their separate orbital paths. However, imagine an intruder, a bystander, who would come running through the tracks, racing toward the center of those tracks. He could be a great danger to the other runners, colliding with them, knocking them over. Well, in this case, the planets are so far apart that it's unlikely that there would be a collision. However, as this object passes by, even though it doesn't hit Earth, its gravitational and magnetic forces are so strong that those gravitational magnetic forces pull and massage the crustal skin of planet Earth on which we live, and pull and massage the underlying flesh, so to speak, of planet Earth, which is the magma mantle beneath the Earth. And that's why the Earth becomes deformed and mountains have been formed. We can see the evidence quite clearly in mountain building that has occurred throughout the ages as a result of this passing object coming in.
And, I'm a little curious here. Like you had mentioned that Jupiter is really close to being a brown dwarf star. So if that's the case, I mean, what determines what a moon is and what's not? Because now Jupiter has how many moons orbiting around of it? I mean, could any of those actually be planets?
Yes, that's possible. I mean, it is. I'm not much. I haven't studied that so quite deeply enough, and even the scientists, astronomers, astrophysicists don't know if there's some form of life on Jupiter's moons, Ganymede, Io, Callisto, and Titan, is it, or Tycho? One of those moons could have life on it because they could be solid objects like Earth. They could be gaining heat energy and some form of minimal light energy from Jupiter, which would be their sun. And it's possible. I don't know for sure, but it's an interesting consideration. Anytime you have a brown dwarf star, or better yet, an adult star with planets orbiting around it, there's a possibility of life on those planets.
Yeah, I mean, because they lie to us about so much, and that's why when people say, oh, no, there's definitely not life here or there, I say, well, if we're going to agree that we've been lied to, we have to also agree that we could have been lied to about everything. So who's to say that there's not planets orbiting Jupiter or something like that? And, I mean, how would we know? We're not up there.
Right. Well, there are planets orbiting Jupiter, and I think they're pretty curious to know if there's life. They look for water. That's the main indication of life. But the main cover-up would be for the purpose of preventing the public from losing their obedience and their control by the power elite. That's the reason they want to cover up everything.
Right, and what I guess I'm getting at with the whole Jupiter thing is then this brown dwarf star, Planet X, then this brown dwarf star could very well have planets around it. Most likely does. So I wonder, could we see any? We can't see the dwarf star itself because it's too cold or what have you. It's dark. But what about, will light reflect off any of the planets that might be orbiting around this thing, and maybe we could see those?
It's engulfed. Well, I agree. There are said to be planets orbiting around it, and it is logical that it would have planets because it's like a huge vacuum cleaner as it travels through deep space, gravitationally pulling in smaller planets and comets. So it's really engulfed by huge, by many, many celestial objects, and that are all gravitationally captured by this huge Planet X. And in fact, James McCann had announced several years ago that he got indications from his contacts in the military and professional astronomers down in Project Wormwood down in Australia that what he quoted as, he was quoting these contacts as saying that a mini solar system is moving into our solar system. And that would make sense. You have a solar system would be a star or a star-like object with objects orbiting around it. So yeah, I'm quite sure that it has many objects around it.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now, would it be possible at all to be able to see something like this at night? And I ask because I have noticed, I've talked about this a few times now, I've noticed what I can only call a star up in my night sky. And when I look closely at it, it's usually around between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning, I can see what looks like planetoid objects around this thing. Now, I don't know what it is. It might be something normal. I'm no professional, but I'm curious, could it be possible to see it at night, even on the East Coast?
So you would need an infrared. Okay. Right now, it's pretty much dark. Huge as it is, it's not emitting hardly any or zero visible light, only infrared, as the article states, because it's a smoldering brown dwarf star, and those are not big enough to go into nuclear fusion to generate visible light. So you would not see it now. Later on, we'll see it when it gets closer to the sun, because now it begins to light up as it gets closer to the sun, because of the electrical interaction between Planet X and the sun. And it starts to glow red. And that's what, these ancient historians wrote about. They said they saw this red, fiery, glowing, coiling, spoiled, undulating tail serpent in the sky. So you know from ancient accounts that this thing is going to start lighting up when it gets closer. And its companion bodies, this orbiting comets, will also light up. That's the key to visual light emission from these objects is closer proximity to the sun. That's when they start lighting up.
And now,
so right now you can't see it. It's probably, I suspect that it's probably way out near Saturn someplace, making a big U-turn. Well, it has to make a huge U-turn around deep in the outer solar system.
Well, it's funny you said Saturn, John. I normally don't interrupt like this, but I'm getting all excited over here because you mentioned Saturn, and I had just read an article where they were talking about, I guess, the government, some fashion of the government, and NASA was putting together a plan to possibly shoot some kind of nukes at Saturn to try to ignite it.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That was a number of years ago. Right, they had a nuclear power source, and they were going
Yeah.
to crash this thing into Saturn.
And try to ignite
you
it.
know, it's strange, but there is a lot of satanic ritual involved in NASA.
And Saturn. Yeah.
I mean, Saturn is an ancient name for Satan.
Yeah.
And they worshipped, and these crazy world rulers still worship Satan, obviously. That's how they get their power. And this would be a sacrifice to Satan. I mean, in their demented agenda, that's what they might be doing. It sounds kind of weird, but if you look at NASA's activities, there have been rituals, satanic rituals performed in space, from what I understand. Tex Mars documented some of it, and I think there are other people that documented it too. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but I believe that Planet X is out there because it has to make a U-turn. You see, if you look at basic physics, we know that it makes an elliptical orbit, and it goes around the sun and comes back again and over the top of the sun and then through the solar system, where it causes great gravitational and magnetic havoc with the planets, all the planets. And then it's slingshotted back by the centrifugal, by the pulling force, the centripetal slingshot force of the sun when it makes that U-turn. And the sun shoots it back through the solar system, back out into deep space, where it travels for centuries, actually about 18 centuries. And during that 18th century trip, it loops around another sun, our solar system's twin sun, a dead sun, billions and billions of miles out there, that has been identified by NASA, not by me, not by conjecture, but by NASA, in a 1987 encyclopedia, a New Science and Invention Encyclopedia, the 1987 edition. You can see the diagram of our sun's twin sun given to them by NASA. Yeah. And it just sounds strange that we would have a twin sun, but astronomers and astrophysicists will tell you that most solar systems that they have found out about do have a twin sun. They're binary. What's called binary.
Right.
Two.
So it makes sense that we do.
Twin suns is like two tennis players on a tennis court. Our sun would be representing the tennis player on the near court. Our sun's distant dead sun would represent the tennis player on the far court. And Planet X would represent the tennis ball. Or the tennis ball would represent Planet X, being batted back and forth by these two suns.
Mm-hmm. So
and that's what we have. And we found it to be a very regular, consistent time interval of 36 and a half centuries. So it takes 36 and a half centuries for this Planet X, this tennis ball, to go from one tennis player back to the other, to loop from one sun back to the other sun. 36 and a half centuries. It's like clockwork. In fact, you could call it a celestial pendulum. As you know, the pendulum on a grandfather's clock swings at a uniform, consistent time interval of so many seconds. It takes so many seconds for that pendulum on the grandfather's clock to make one complete cyclical swing.
So now
you can predict that time, just like you can predict 36 and a half centuries for this celestial pendulum to come into our solar system, to damage Earth, destroy almost all life on Earth, to give planet Earth a new facelift, building new mountains, bringing down other mountains, sinking land masses, bringing up new land masses from the depths of the sea, and you have a whole new Earth created.
Right. Now, if it was anywhere near Saturn, say right now, then would we be able to see an unusual type of strong pull on Saturn, where you'll see, sometimes you could look at these objects in the sky, and you know something's nearby because you'll see them wobbling, where something's gravity's pulling on them and pushing on them.
Yes, absolutely, yes. You could see storms. We've seen storms on Saturn, and possibly we've seen pole shifts, perhaps magnetic pole shifts, maybe even geographic pole shifts on the outer planets. Neptune, I believe, had a pole shift. You know, like the eye. Neptune has I believe, an eye like Jupiter has an eye. That eye is actually a whirlpool, some kind of a swirling windstorm. And when they saw that Neptune a number of years ago, there was that, they call it a wizard's eye, I think. And that eye on Neptune actually vertically shifted, indicating that there was some kind of a pole shift on Neptune.
Well, and the eye disappeared on Jupiter at one point too, didn't it?
That's right. Yeah. That's such a key clue right there. There's no reason why the eye on Jupiter would disappear. I'm glad you brought that up. I had forgotten about that. That tells me that, you know, this object, when it comes in, you might say, well, wait a minute, it's under Saturn, it hasn't gotten to Jupiter yet. But that's not the case. You have to. It has actually passed Jupiter before it got to Saturn.
Yeah.
And the way you could visualize it is this. You have visualize a circular table. This is a modern day, you know, microcosmic analogy of how you could visualize this whole situation, which is quite complex. Visualize a circular table in a restaurant. And on the table, the center of the table is a lamp that represents the sun. The circular table, which we'll say we can make it revolve, okay? And that revolving circular table represents the solar system's ecliptic, which is that invisible disk in space on which all the planets revolve around the sun. And now visualize from the center lamp on this slowly revolving table, a little bit out away from the center lamp, you might place something that's quite visual, easy to remember, like maybe a cranberry. That cranberry might represent planet Mercury. A little further out, away, further from the center lamp, would be another small object, maybe a blueberry, which would represent planet Venus. And further out, you might place a walnut, which might represent planet Earth, and so on. Jupiter, farther out, would be perhaps represented by a grapefruit.
And John, somebody just made a good point in the chat too, that Saturn actually lost one of its stripes at one point, didn't it?
That's right. I mean, these are major clues. These are anomalies that are extraordinary. For Jupiter to lose its eye, its whirlpool, and the band on Jupiter to disappear, we saw activity on Jupiter. We saw comets crashing into Jupiter around 2009. Yeah, about 5 years ago. And they were photographed, of course, by amateurs, because NASA would never release its own photographs. We had to rely on amateur astronomers to show us a comet crashing into the southern hemisphere of Jupiter in July of 2009. Then another comet that year or the next year crashed into Jupiter, southern hemisphere again. That told me that planet X was coming beneath Jupiter. And if you go back to that table slowly revolving circular table that I was describing, and with the planets all, you know, laid out on the table, rotating, and the sun, the lamp in the center, imagine now that planet X is going to be represented by someone lying on the floor, off to the side of the table, not underneath the table, but way off to the side. And that someone lying on the floor, let's say he uses a slingshot to shoot a ball bearing up toward the underside of the table. And let's say that that ball bearing is able to penetrate the underside of the table and come up through the top of the table. That's trajectory of Planet X. It's coming from the south, according to Dr. Robert S. Harrington, who is mentioned in this landmark New York Times article. Dr. Harrington contributed to that article in the New York Times. And Dr. Harrington says he believes that it's probably a brown dwarf star. And that's what I'm reading from the article. Dr. Robert S. Harrington, chief astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., believes it is a brown dwarf star exerting this tremendous gravitational force.
Now, was he the one that was just recently killed, or not recently, but was killed?
Yeah, that's right. He was. I mean, it was there's quite a lot of circumstantial evidence that he was murdered because he was his lifelong quest was to find Planet X. And he was the lead man in this search, and he indeed dispatched telescopes. He may have gone personally himself, but he stated in his documents before his death that he was dispatching an 8-inch telescope with a specially ground lens made by some of his NASA scientists and technicians that would be capable of viewing Planet X. Now, an 8-inch telescope is kind of it's not very large at all. So Dr. Harrington evidently expected this object to be big enough to see with that rather small 8-inch telescope. Dr. Harrington dispatched the 8-inch telescope to Black Birch Observatory in New Zealand because you have to go close to the South Pole in order to view this thing because it's coming in from below the planets, below the feet of planet Earth, which would be the Antarctica. And so you have to go down close to the South Pole to see it. And that's why he dispatched the telescope to Black Birch Observatory in New Zealand. The photographs were taken consecutive nights with a fixed telescope. And when you see one object out of millions of objects in the sky, one object is moving and all the other millions of objects are stationary in the two photographs. You take two photographs and you can't hardly distinguish one from the other. It must have been an infrared telescope. But you can hardly distinguish the two photographic plates and until you overlay one plate on the other. One photograph taken one night, another photograph taken the other night, and they're transparent lenses, transparencies that can be viewed when you look through them. You shine light through the side of the two superimposed or overlaid photographic plates. And then what Clyde Tombaugh, the brilliant astronomer who discovered Pluto in the 1930s, Clyde Tombaugh devised a blink comparator, which was a way of alternately flashing the light illuminating one plate and then flashing the light illuminating the other plate alternately back and forth rapidly enough that when you look at it, the human eye can actually distinguish any change in position between any one of the millions of objects on the two plates. All the other stars would appear stationary because they're so far away, they're not moving at all. They're stars anyway. And so they're stationary, but if there's an object that's moving, like Planet X, coming in toward us, you're going to see a change in the position of that one out of a million different objects in the sky by using Clyde Tombaugh's blink comparator method, and that's what Dr. Harrington did. And he was going to bring his discovery back. He had to put out a memo, which we have on the internet, stating that when those plates are returned from New Zealand, I'm going to analyze them, and I'm going to reveal to the world what the findings were. Well, Dr. Harrington never lived to do that. He died of cancer within a matter of a couple of weeks. And what happened to the plates? There's sort of evidence right there that he was murdered. The plates were never revealed. They never said, hey, Dr. Harrington died, but don't worry, we've taken his discovery and we're going to reveal it to the world. No, not a word was said about it. Those plates were obviously confiscated and secured somewhere. so that no one would ever know what happened. And what the discovery was that Dr. Harrington was about to tell them that this object was indeed where he had calculated it to be, and it was indeed moving toward our solar system, which you would expect it to happen because the sun is so huge. This object has to be pulled in by our sun. It has to be. The sun is 1/3 of a million Earth masses, so its gravitational pull is incredibly great.
Tremendous.
And this object is even stated. Here's your proof right here, and nobody has ever picked up on this. This is really solid evidence. They tell you in this article, New York Times, January 30th, 1983. I'm going to quote, recent calculations by the United States Naval Observatory have confirmed the orbital perturbations exhibited by Uranus and Neptune, which Dr. Thomas C. Van Flandern, an astronomer at the observatory, says could be explained by, quote, a single undiscovered planet. He and a colleague, Dr. Robert Harrington, now deceased, they calculate, etc., that the 10th planet should be 2 to 5 times more massive than Earth. We know that's grossly understated. It's much greater than that. Again, I believe they must have been told to phony up the calculations and really give us a false impression of the size of this object. Because if they had told us how big it was, it could have caused panic. But it's certainly greater than 2 to 5 times. 2 to 5 times more massive? No, somebody got that wrong. 5 times greater in diameter, yes, I can see that. Because if it's 5 times greater in diameter, then it would be 125 times greater in volume. And then Earth. And that's, now you're really giving us an accurate multiple factor of its size in relation to Earth.
See, and what I like,
125
John,
times the volume. In other words, you could fit 125 Earth into Planet X if X's diameter was 5 times the diameter of Earth.
Well, I was going to say what I like about your approach to this, John, is that you simply throw out facts. You put out the breadcrumbs that lead to the pieces to the puzzle that really show that they are hiding something. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to argue with you at all when you lay it out, because everything you've said so far is factual.
Well, thank you. And it's hard to argue with the crazy weather that's killing thousands and thousands of people every year.
Yeah, it is.
And it's easy to understand and to be what's the word, practically and logically scared of what's about to happen so that we can be prepared. Not to be scared into a frantic, senseless activity, but to be scared into calculated preparedness. We have enough time to take it easy and to figure out what we're going to do. So that this is the main evidence and the main thrust of all this. The impetus for understanding it and believing it is, if you don't, as Marshall Master says, if you don't deal with this thing, it's going to deal with you. If you don't prepare for it, it's going to kill you. So, I mean, it's easy to be skeptical, but when a bullet is coming towards you, you don't have time to deny it.
That's right. Just because you can't believe you'd ever be shot doesn't change the fact that the bullet's coming for you. So absolutely. I mean, when you talk about the newspaper articles, we've discussed the spot disappearing from Jupiter and from Neptune and Saturn's ring, one of the rings disappearing, and things like that. Then you get into Dr. Harrington, who announces that. That's why I say never announce I'm gonna get the facts and I'm gonna release them next week or when you get wait until you have them and then put them out there, because these dirt balls will kill you quick. And and that's just another piece of evidence that, okay, what the hell are they hiding? And I think you've got it pretty much put together, buddy.
Right. And you know what? Here's another piece of evidence that they murdered Dr. Harrington. We have the obituary on the internet. The U.S. Naval Observatory did an obituary for their chief astronomer, at the death of their chief astronomer, Dr. Robert S. Harrington. And in that obituary, they made a big blunder. They tried to cover up any possibility that people would suspect that Dr. Harrington was murdered. And in their attempt to cover up that murder suspicion, they actually increased the suspicion that he was murdered. What they said was a blatant lie. They said in the obituary that Dr. Harrington had lost all interest in his search for Planet X.
I've seen that.
In his later years. And this was diametrically opposite to the truth. The truth was Dr. Harrington's whole life revolved around it, and he was at the apex of his discovery, ready to announce it to the world, to become the most famous astronomer in the world, making the greatest discovery of anything, any discovery in all of modern history. In fact, that discovery is greater than any other political occurrence that puny man could have ever made, any great historical events that man made on this earth.
And it would have clearly showed that NASA was lying to us all along, because how could they say they didn't know about it when here's just a regular guy, who's got the goods?
And how could they say that he lost all interest in Planet X during his later years, which is a blatant lie? How could they make such a stupid, if they had just been quiet and not even offered that ludicrous lie that Dr. Harrington had lost interest in Planet X during his last years? They might have, they would have had a better case for covering up the truth. But now they've really made it blatantly obvious that they murdered Dr. Harrington just by that lie in his official obituary by the U.S. Naval Observatory.
Well, you know why I think they did that? They did that because they knew that anybody who had any interest in Planet X was going to read that. And it's pretty much a slap to your face saying, this could be you. That's what I think.
Well, that's a possibility, yeah. I mean, that's surely possible. But look at what they're doing, though. They're exposing their lie to the world. Well, thank goodness we're here to flag it and to tell everyone, hey, look, if you need to believe that this thing is true because you need to protect your life. Now, it's like it would be one thing if it was just an academic argument over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. That wouldn't really affect people's lives very much.
No.
But this thing, the question of does this object exist, and if it does exist, it is by the laws of basic physics, it is being gravitationally pulled into our solar system, and by the laws of basic physics, its magnetic and gravitational forces will give Earth a new facelift and pull land masses up from the depths of the sea and sink land masses to the depths of the sea, which is what has happened in the past.
Well, we're seeing that now. We're seeing islands popping up in places throughout the ocean, and while seeing other ones disappearing.
That's right. You're right. And Edward Casey, the psychic, and you've got to believe when psychics make predictions, because it's just amazing the things that they are able to predict and the healing that they're able to effect on people. They're all proven to be not only psychics predicting cataclysmic events in the distant future, but they've also proven to be great healers. And these are gifts obviously from God. Even though God does not always choose Christians or Jewish prophets or Israelite prophets as his spokesman to warn mankind. He chooses American Indians. He chooses people from various cultures around the world, the most unlikely people he chooses as his prophets. Jim Singer was one of the prophets, a man who was nothing more than a factory manager in Canada, common man, was suddenly given these visions by God of great natural disasters. And he and his wife were just talking, and they on the videotape that I have, they both described that there was no supernatural occurrence that they had ever had, or no supernatural experience. They were just discussing their plans, how they were going to spend their weekend, and suddenly Jim Singer went into a trance. He stiffened up, and his wife thought he was having a heart attack. That's what she said. And he just wouldn't talk. He was silent. He was in a trance. And Jim Singer describes what happened. He said that a man came up to me, through an angel, some kind of a man, and he showed me that there would be a plane crash. The plane crash, I didn't know where it was, where it would be, but it would just be in green fields. And sure enough, weeks later, he read of a plane crash in green cornfields where there was incredible survival in this crash when people should have been killed. And so many people survived. I don't have all the details of the crash, but in the vision, Jim said that this angel, or maybe it was God, we don't know, told him that they will feel my power as I save their lives. They will call out to me. Of course, everybody calls out to God in a plane crash. All atheists call out to God at the moment the plane is plunging to the earth. And God told, or this angel told, it must have been God, because he said, they will feel my power as I save them from this disaster.
Well, as the old saying goes, there's no atheists in foxholes.
Right. That's absolutely true. I have experienced that myself firsthand. But anyway, so there's a case of a prophet. And then he said in further visions, other visions that Jim Singer had, often the visions and after God has fulfilled his purpose of bringing the message to his chosen prophet. And then a person no longer is a prophet. He just picks up the message that is given to him. But in other visions later on, Jim Singer was told that there would be great disasters. He was shown images of people wandering about dazed in the midst of huge social upheaval, where everyone was suffering. People were wandering around begging for a glass of water, and they were dying of thirst. And it was a horrible situation, and planes coming in, trying to rescue people. Gordon Michael Scallion talks about the same thing. He may have lost his prophetic, may no longer be a prophet, but he described the same visions that he had, where Gordon Michael Scallion was just an ordinary guy. He was in technical field, and this was all described in an ABC documentary titled Ancient Prophecies. You might be able to see that on YouTube. I have it. I should put the episodes of Ancient Prophecies on YouTube. But Gordon Michael Scallion was just giving a lecture to colleagues, for his as a consultant in electronics and high technology. And all of a sudden, he lost his voice, and he went into basically a trance, and he was taken to a hospital, and he began to see these visions. And what he saw was the earth, the oceans themselves, he said, buckled. The oceans themselves buckled, and land masses protruded upward from the sea. So it is horrific to imagine these visions that these men got. He said, I couldn't sleep. I had to go to sleep for 3 days. I was so fatigued from these visions. And the prophet Daniel in the Bible, 600 BC, said the same thing. He had visions given to him from God. He described the visions, which describe actually, believe it or not, in Daniel chapter 7, the rise that God has given to Daniel, the rise of the Great British Empire, the rise of the American Empire, the rise of the Nazi Empire, and the rise of the Russian Bolshevik Empire was given to Daniel in around 600 BC. So, God has chosen many prophets. One of the greatest was Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet.
Yeah.
And these guys were all great healers, too. Every one of them had the ability to look into a person, even if that person was not present, and determine what their illness was, and it actually saved their lives. I mean, the tangible evidence of Edgar Casey's life-saving healing is all documented in a huge library at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Huge library documenting his trance. When he went into a trance, he would diagnose a particular patient who wrote to him, or a family member of that patient who was dying and had an incurable disease. And Casey never met the person. He was lived hundreds of miles away from that person. And yet, in this trance, they would tell him that, for example, Laura has a terrible sore on her leg. The doctors want to amputate it. How can we save her leg? So Edgar Casey went into a trance. This is many, many different trances that he had gone into that were all recorded by his wife and his secretary and documented at the library. But this one, Edgar Casey went into a trance and said, "We are now on State Street. We're now passing the street, another street whacker, and we are entering a blue house. Something's burning in the kitchen on the stove. There's a pot boiling. We're going upstairs. Now we have the body. The body is lying on a bed. We are going through the heart, through the lungs, through the arteries. Now we have found the cause, the source. Yes, her leg is festering badly. She has been bitten by a tiny brown recluse spider while sleeping one night. The cure would be oil of smoke. Mm-hmm. Bancroft Pharmacy, top shelf, Chicago. Bancroft Pharmacy, top shelf. Well, he woke up. He had no idea what he had said in the trance. He never knew what he said. They called Bancroft Pharmacy, and Bancroft Pharmacy said, "No, we don't have it. That oil of smoke, that company went out of business. I'm looking at the shelf. I don't see any oil of smoke here at all." They went out of business about 1910, 1915. So they did another reading with Edgar Casey, and he said, "No, oil of smoke in a trance. The oil of smoke is on the shelf behind the blue bottle." So they called back Bancroft Pharmacy, and the pharmacist looked behind the blue bottle and said, "Oh, yeah, I didn't even see it back there. Okay, I'll send it to you right away." There is a miracle from God.
That's fascinating.
This was documented. This is not hearsay, but it was documented on ABC, the famous ABC television documentary titled Ancient Prophecies, which I have on videotape, and I transferred to DVD, and I have to put the episodes of it onto YouTube.
Fascinating. I've seen those. I've seen some of those, and I do remember that story. And you see documentation like that, and how can you deny that people are really connecting somewhere and getting these answers? I mean, it's obvious.
It's God. Actually, it has to be God, because Satan does not like to heal. Satan kills. So God gives messages to His chosen servants, and you just can't bargain with God to become a prophet.
No.
If he either chooses you or He doesn't choose you. He chooses some people to be comforters, some people to be an encourager. I think God has chosen me to be an encourager, to help people and inspire them, but not a prophet. No. Other people are chosen to be prophets, but you get the role that God gives you. And some American Indians, have exhibited the prophecy. As I said, Gordon Michael Scallion, an American who's still alive today, Edgar Casey, who died around 1941, saved many, many lives in his
he
trances.
served his purpose, and
But you know,
yeah.
but you know what, Michael? Here's the important thing: these healers predicted the end of the world. They predicted pole shifts. Edgar Casey, in his trance, I'm going to paraphrase or repeat some of the things that have been documented when he was in these trances curing people. He would come up with these uncalled for prophecies about global catastrophes. And of course, this was part of God's plan, not only to heal people, but to warn the world about what is about to happen unless people begin to make themselves seek out God in their minds spiritually and find the God who created them, who brought this miraculous body into being, our own human body, and the miraculous world on which we thrive.
Well, my body was
seek out that God and not just take this life for as something that we happen to be here, enjoy it, and then die.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. We've got to take another break here, John. This is the last one, and with John. And so, John, we're back. And where would you like to go now? I know we were talking about preparedness in the beginning, but I don't think we completed that. I don't know.
Yeah, we could touch on that in a few minutes. Sure. I wanted to finish up on the scientific evidence. I had drifted myself away from the crux of the point that I was getting to, reading this article from the New York Times, January 30th, 1983, heralding the launch of the infrared astronomical satellite, which they had dedicated solely to sighting Planet X. Well, in this paragraph it says, Dr. Van Flandern says that this pulling on the outer planets could be explained by a single undiscovered planet. He and Dr. Harrington, and I'll just quote what we had already passed over what we said about the size of Planet X. Harrington and Van Flandern were the two astronomers searching for Planet X, and they said that they believe that it's about 5 billion miles, quoting from the article in the New York Times, about 5 billion miles beyond the orbit of Pluto. Hardly next door, but still within the gravitational influence of the sun. Now that is such a telling, powerful piece of evidence, that one little quote. What Dr. Harrington and Dr. Flandern are stating here in the New York Times, is that this object, though it's 5 billion miles away, it is still within the gravitational influence of the sun. That's what they state right here. Being under the gravitational influence of the sun, there is nowhere for this, these are my own words now, there's nowhere for this Planet X to travel but toward the sun. Just as, for example, if you were to put a ball bearing on a table, on a kitchen table, and lay a huge magnet on that, in the center of that table, if that ball bearing were placed close enough even within the outer fringes of the gravitational force field of that powerful magnet, that ball bearing would slowly begin to roll toward the magnet. And as you know, as you can visualize, that ball bearing would begin to accelerate quite readily, quite rapidly, until it would seem to fly right into the magnet. And that's what somebody once told me a story about an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging thing in the hospital, a system where people get MRIs, and they had put a huge, massive stand-up oxygen tank too close to the MRI. So when the electromagnetic field was generated, it sucked that tank right in to the MRI, into the machine. So that just shows what happens when an object gets even within the outer fringes of a magnetic field. It slowly moves, but then accelerates quite rapidly. Well, that's what would happen to Planet X. Even though it's not a magnetic field, it's a gravitational force field that the sun is generating. And it works the same way as a magnetic field. It's pulling this object in close. So it is inevitable. It is inexorable. There's no way to stop it. It's coming in. It's not going to hit the sun. It's coming in the past every 36.5 centuries because it's a celestial pendulum. Like clockwork, it comes in every 36.5 centuries, and it doesn't hit Earth, doesn't hit the sun, but it loops around the sun and slingshots in the manner that I described before. So it sends it back out where it then, like the tennis ball that's whacked from the near player in the near court to the player on the far court. 36.5 centuries ago. So anyway, we've got evidence that this thing is bound to come in. There's no way to stop it, and this is absolute proof that it is coming in. But going back to time interval, and showing you the regular precision chronological indexing of the visitation of this object every 36.5 centuries, like clockwork, this celestial pendulum comes in. Well, you go back and you can see scientists, and I forget the guy's name, but anybody, any scientist, not just this scientist or this ecologist, they've discovered that tree rings on trees around 1630 BC became very much narrowed for several years, for a number of years. Why would that occur? Well, because when this object comes in, it causes tremendous heating of the Earth's molten and solid core and the Earth's mantle, and you have tremendous gaseous and flux fluid of metal and rock emanating from the Earth in the form of volcanoes. Magma is forced out with great heat, and hundreds of volcanoes around the world begin to erupt simultaneously. This causes a nuclear winter effect with ash thickly blanketing the entire atmosphere of planet Earth, so that we have found, and if you go to Wikipedia, you can find out that trees in England, in the British Isles, trees in the Americas were all exhibited, well, or maybe prehistoric, what they call petrified trees. You ever hear of the petrified forest? Well, some of those trees, they were able to detect that the tree rings were very much narrowed. I read that in Wikipedia, and they found out that all of them indicated that the narrowing of the tree rings occurred around 1630 BC. And that would be roughly 36.5 centuries ago. So we're getting close to the return of Planet X. Getting back to prophecy, we were talking about Edgar Cayce and what a great healer he was. And all these healers had the gift. For some reason, they would have this dual ability to predict future disasters. Well, Edgar Cayce, in his trances, where he was healing many, many people who had incurable diseases, in his trances he would come up with these unrelated prophetic statements. And some of these statements were, well, I have the book titled Edgar Cayce on Atlantis, compiled by his son Hugh Lynn Cayce. And in that book, and in the Ancient Prophecies ABC TV special documentary, Edgar Cayce is quoted as saying in his trances, the greater portion of Japan must go into the sea. And he also is quoted as saying, San Francisco, Los Angeles, both of these must be destroyed before New York. And he also said that what is the coastline of many a land will become the bed of the ocean. And he also said that in his trances that the earth there will be a shifting of the poles, such as what was the more tropical, what was the more frigid will become the more tropical.
And let me ask
you, a geographical pole shift.
Let me ask you this quick question that came in the chat a little while ago. One listener wants to know if it would be survivable above ground? Do you have a chance if you're not underground?
Everyone who studied the subject and also from my own reasoning, we all agree that there's nowhere where you can really prove that you're going to be safe. Now, in terms of the flooding, yeah, you're better off getting away from the coast. But who's going to move? I'm not too far from the coast. I can't sell my house and move. Yeah. But one thing I could do is watch when these disasters begin to occur, like what many people believe is going to be a tremendous landslide-driven tsunami generated from an island in the Canary Islands off the west coast of Africa in the Atlantic Ocean. That island is called La Palma, and it's a volcanic island. The volcano is the Cumbre Vieja volcano, which is the western flank of that volcano. That volcanic mountain has been separated with a gap of about 12 feet separating the western flank from the entire west mountain proper. Now that separated flank is ready to slide into the ocean, into the Atlantic Ocean, way out east off the west coast of Africa. And this is what the geologists tell us. I have the documentary, Mega Tsunami, where Dr. Simon Day and Dr. Bill McGuire of the Open College in London tell us that when this thing slides into the ocean, the tsunami, they estimated, they've done this in Switzerland, a scientist named Fritz Hermann, I believe his name is. And he shows us in this documentary, Mega Tsunami. You could check that out on YouTube, Mega Tsunami.
Okay.
And you'll see he did large scale, small scale experimentation with huge masses into large bodies of water in a laboratory. And also computer calculations that show that when this island, half trillion tons of western flank of the Cumbre Vieja volcanic mountain slides into the ocean, it will cause such a tidal wave, such that the initial wave, when it plops into the ocean, will be about the height of 2 Empire State Buildings. Then it will sort of level off and smooth down as it travels through the depths of the ocean at a speed of 450 miles an hour. It'll take 8 hours to get from the west coast of Africa to New York, Boston, Miami, Charlotte, etc. And in 8 hours, that tsunami wave, and when it gets to the shallower shores of the Atlantic coast, will rear up, as they all do, as oceanographers will tell you. They rear up because of the shallowness. All that mass of water now has nowhere to go but up, and it forms a huge mountain of water, a tidal wave which they estimate to be about 60 stories, at least, high, and that would inundate all of New York City. We've seen that dramatized in the 2005 movie Day After Tomorrow.
Oh, yeah,
Check
absolutely.
out that movie on YouTube.
Yeah, I believe Art Bell and Whitley Strieber put that together. We've got a call. We've got 978 area code. You're on Late Night in the Midlands. First name, where you're calling from, please.
Yeah, it's James, Michael. How you doing?
Hey, James. How are you?
You good? How you doing, John?
Hi, James.
Are you familiar with former NASA scientist Norman Berggren and the Ringmakers of Saturn?
How do you spell that name?
Norman R. Berggren, Bergrun, and he put out a book called Ringmakers of Saturn, where he claims when the Voyager went blank there, when it was passing the outer planets, he's saying it was really taking some dynamite pictures of huge spacecraft that were making rings around Saturn. It's my belief that these, whatever they're doing over there, they're trying to make some gravity wave or something to disrupt the orbit of Nibiru coming in. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. Around what time frame did this, you said the Voyager passed and its transmissions were blacked out for a period of time?
You remember that when it passed through the outer planets, that they said that they lost the signal, and then when it got past a certain planet, they said all of a sudden the signal come back.
They always lie. Whenever they want to co-opt all the photographs from any kind of observatory in space. They always lie and say it failed. They did that. They lied about the Hubble telescope in the same way, and about the Pioneer 10 space probe, which I was just describing before, where they said, "Oh, we lost transmission," but they had not, and they were keeping all the data for themselves, and they wanted to keep that information secret. So it seems quite logical to me and likely to me that yes, these were secret photographs that they were taking, and it was probably something to do with Nibiru's gravitational forces on Saturn. Certainly, because let me tell you, Planet X is the biggest concern in the minds of all the power elite, and the power elite are the ones who determine what NASA does. It's all they use NASA like they use like you would use a slave, and for their own greedy purposes. And certainly, this is what they really care about. They don't care about furthering knowledge of space for the world, for the scientific community of the world. They care about their own immediate well-being, and they want to know what's happening so they can track this thing and know when they should go underground. They have underground cities that are fabulous, trillion-dollar underground cities, well documented. Photographs have been taken of them, films. So yeah, I believe you're absolutely correct. That was a secret mission that Voyager was on.
Well, you can actually see the photographs if you Google Ringmakers of Saturn. There's videos of his talk and a lot of the spacecraft itself. Did you know that George Maxwell said that Saturn used to look like a big eye and used to look like it was winking at you in ancient times, and then I guess Nibiru come through and perturb it. So that's just something interesting. All right, thanks a lot, Michael.
All right, thank you, James. I appreciate the call.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, so interesting, and there's just a little more to add to the big puzzle here, huh?
Oh, yeah, I mean, so the cover-up is really becoming more blatant now because this object is coming closer, and obviously we know, again, we're going back to basic physics. When an object as huge as this object, and I haven't given you an estimation of the size, but Dr. Robert S. Harrington, before he was murdered, believed that it was a brown dwarf star, and incidentally, that puts to rest the falsehood of that puny estimation that he made. He was probably told to say that so that he wouldn't panic the people, but it puts to rest that falsehood and gives you the truth. When Dr. Harrington simply said, "We believe that it's a brown dwarf star." That's what he said in the New York Times article. And a brown dwarf star, by definition, just look up the definition, the puniest, let's be as conservative as possible in our estimation. The puniest brown dwarf star is defined as 3 Jupiter masses. Okay, now one Jupiter, the mass of Jupiter is 318 Earth masses. So the puniest brown dwarf star that Planet X could be would be 3 Jupiters, or 3 times 318 Earth masses. We're getting close to 1,000 Earth masses would be puniest size that Planet X could be, about 1,000 Earth masses. So when this thing comes into our inner solar system and passes over the orbital paths of all the inner planets, it's going to cause terrible destruction. If we happen to be in the season of the year when Earth is, orbiting the sun and far away from Planet X's trajectory, we won't get hurt as badly by the gravitational and magnetic forces of Planet X, but it'll still be devastation. In the last one, during the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, again, when the tree rings were narrowed around 1630 BC, we talked about that with Moses freeing the Israelites from Egypt. God used Planet X to scare the hell out of Pharaoh and the Egyptians and devastate that country so badly that they were forced to release the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, from 400 years of slavery in Egypt. So at that time, the passage of Planet X was probably not as severe as it could have been, because Earth may have been in that season of the year where its orbital path took it around the sun a certain distance away from planet X, but still there was great devastation. We have historical records from the civilizations that existed around 1630. For example, in the Americas, we have legends going back to the Incas of Peru, and to the Aztecs and the Mexicans and the other tribes who lived there, and they said in Central America and South America that their legends show that there was horrible disasters, flooding, and there was several days when the sun did not shine at all. It was dark, and the windstorms were horrific. Everything was extremely intense. Many people died. They would go into caves to try to protect themselves. And at the very same time, now we look back historically, the same period in history, around 1630 BC, Emperor Yaju in China, in his imperial annals, described great disasters in China at the same time period. However, at that time, there was not 3 days of darkness, as there was in the Americas, but there was 3 days of sunlight. So this tells you that the Earth stood still for several days. And China just happened to be facing the Earth when the Earth was forced by some gravitational force or magnetic force to stand still. China happened to be in its daily rotation facing the sun, and therefore you had 3 days of sunlight in China. The Americas, on the other hand, happened to be in their on the dark side at nighttime when the Earth stood still, so it remained dark for 3 days. So here you have various cultures around the world all confirming the same disaster, cataclysm that occurred. And Dr. Immanuel Velikovsky, the great visionary of the 1940s and 50s, who was ridiculed for his belief in these cataclysms between planets, he was the one who lined up all the calendars and did corrections in the various calendars of different cultures and proved that the records from all the cultures describing this great catastrophe, these records were all recorded at the same period in China, in the Americas, etc., and in the Middle East. So this shows that there was all the civilizations attest to this catastrophe having occurred. This was when the Egyptians, the Israelites, were freed from bondage, and the Red Sea actually parted. This is not a myth. There's a physical explanation for that. In basic physics, you could explain it. And I can tell you, if you take a basketball, for example, that basketball represents planet Earth. Now, you hold the basketball between your the tips of your two index fingers, your left-hand index finger, and your right-hand index finger. And like you've seen people do that before on sides, both sides of the basketball. Well, where that index, and then you could someone could spin that basketball. Now, where your index finger is, that point doesn't really rotate around the entire ball, does it? It just sort of pivots, right, on the tips of your fingers. However, the center of the basketball would actually rotate vertically as you spin it. Can you visualize that?
Sure.
Well, the center would be around the Americas, and that's where the pole shift occurred, or some amount of pole shift. Could have been, maybe several degrees, and that's where the pole shift occurred in China, such that what the result was, what the North Pole up until the Exodus and the Great Disaster of 1650 BC, the North Pole was actually around the state of Wisconsin and Ontario, Canada. That's where the North Pole was.
Well, it feels like we've slid into the north here.
Pardon me?
I'm in the south, and it feels like we slipped into the north here.
Well, yeah, because of the air masses that are the extraordinarily unusual air masses that are swooping down, and that's all caused by Planet X. I could get into my theory of why we're getting these big Arctic plunges.
Well, we have about 2 more minutes left here. Well, about 3 more minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity to finish up with whatever you want. But I'd also like to, at some point, I think I mentioned this last time, maybe we can get together and do a video, and I could put that out on my website. We would do a little something extra and put something together.
Yeah, that sounds like a good possibility.
Okay, great. So yeah, you got a few minutes. I just want to thank you quickly before you go into whatever it is you're going to go into, and just say thank you very much for taking time out to be with us. You've become a regular, and I appreciate everything you do, because you don't just throw things out there. You do your research and you bring facts to the table, and I love that.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me and giving me the chance to give information to your listeners so that they can protect themselves, both physically and spiritually, prepare themselves spiritually. You know, even if I were to live an abundant life with no cares and problems, I would, when I die, what's going to happen to me? And I'm concerned about the eternal life. I know that there is another life after this one. And if people are fearful enough, God often drives people to call out to Him out of fear. Sometimes that's the only way He can save people and bring them into an eternal life, is through fear. And I believe this is what's happening. So I'm glad that you've given me that opportunity to help prepare people both for this life physically and for the next life spiritually.
Well, thank you. And now, you have a Facebook page. Do you actually work that yourself? I mean, do you pay attention to it, or?
I do visit it every couple of days.
Okay. And
I know they post a lot of really good information there.
Yeah, I was on it today, and so that's why I was asking. I mean, is that a good way for people to get in contact with you, or do you have another way that you'd like people to do that?
You can email me at, I get a lot of emails, so I have to really check carefully and make sure I don't miss any new responders. But my email address would be JADINARDO. The last name is DiNardo, DINARDO. My first two initials are JA, so it's JADINARDO at optonline.net. That's OPTONLINE. You've probably seen that around, optonline.net.
Absolutely.
And that's how you might contact me.
All right. Well, John, until the next time, and I'm sure you'll be on with us in the very near future, as I just enjoy having you on. It's always a pleasant stream of information, and while it might be some scary information, you don't make it scary. You just present the facts, and I thank you for that.
Well, so appreciate it to you and your audience, Michael.
All right, John. Well, you have a great night, and try to stay warm wherever it is you are. I'm going to do the same.
Good.
All right. Good night, John.
Good night, Michael.
All right, everybody. That was John DiNardo, and again, he chemicals, preservatives, and all this, processed crap. And then we wonder why there's such an epidemic with cancers and different diseases. It's all this poison that's being put in the food. So I would suggest people to, get as pure as they can of whatever they're going to store, for sure. I mean, naturally, if you're starving, you're not going to complain that if you have a can of Chef Boyardee, but
right.
So,
but you're right. You go for the basic foods that I've been mentioning, because they have not been tampered with. Dried legumes, and Vienna sausages. I mean, it doesn't come from the best, meat sources, and canned chicken may not be from the best chicken
better
farms.
Than nothing.
At least it's protein that'll keep you going, but you also supplement that with good vegetable protein also that is pure, because it's the basic grains and legumes that have
wouldn't be a
So,
bad idea for people to store seeds as well while they're still natural before Monsanto has all his, everything flipped over. It wouldn't be
that's
a
right. You can go to the internet and look for heirloom seeds. Look for that word heirloom, Heirloom seeds. Those are non-GMO, and I keep them in a refrigerator, not in a freezer. I would not freeze seeds, but keeping them sealed real well in a refrigerator is a good thing to do. So there are many things. Of course, even more important than food would be water.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot survive very long without water. And again, I have stored many empty bottles over the years, plastic bottles. I don't like plastic, but it's the only thing you can get, basically, and that's what you can survive on it. And you can even filter the bottled water that's been sitting in plastic bottles like for 5, 6, 7 years that I've had, sitting in these plastic bottles stacked up. And you can always pour them through a gravity filter, such as the Berkeley ceramic filter, and then pour it through a carbon, or these countertop carbon filters. So, and even if you drink it out of the bottle, I mean, it's not the best, but it'll keep you alive. So water is extremely important. Say, I would go to the recycling places and start getting bottles from them, because it would take you too long to collect bottles. There may be a disaster looming very soon, so you want to go to a recycling center and see if they'll give you a whole, fill up your car and your trunk with empty plastic bottles.
See, and I'll save like the old milk gallons. I don't drink milk myself, but others in the home do. So, I'll save those. I'll wash them out, save them, and put water in them.
That's right. It's a smart thing to do. Well, anyway, so there's a lot to talk about regarding survival. People who live in areas many people are living in areas that will be flooded out. So think of what you can do. Get a rubber raft. Look on the internet. Look for very inexpensive flotation devices. And also emergency. What do you call these? Life vests and life jackets.
Yeah.
You could even have it in your car. See, if many cars get flooded out because they get caught in, and it's impossible to, even if you're safety minded, sometimes it's impossible to avoid flash floods. Your car gets instantly stuck in the middle of a flash flood.
I have never been in one yet, but I'm in a good place for that to happen. And it's not happened yet, thank God. But
do some reading on the internet, find out what you could do. I know some people carry life vests in their cars, and
that's a great idea. That's a great idea, actually, John. And I've never even thought about that, keeping a life vest in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
They're rather compact. He is a great deceiver, and his men who rule the world from the pinnacle of the pyramid of power want to trick the world into believing that they have all the power to create these disasters. In fact, I just realized there's a parallel in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus, from the Israelites represent the people who believed, who are true believers. And today, they were just a picture. The Israelites were just a portrait or a representation of the people that God has empowered with faith today. And those people that he has empowered with faith today are spiritual Israel, and they're all over the world. There's some in Nigeria and some in the United States. They don't happen. Some of them are Jewish, but many are of all different nationalities, races, and they're a minority actually in each race and each nation who believe, been chosen by God to believe in God. And that's what the Israelites of ancient Egypt represented, the future spiritual believers, which are us. Well, in those days, Pharaoh represented, in the book of Exodus, Pharaoh represented Satan, who dominated and enslaved the Israelites. Well, we are similarly, parallelly, being dominated and enslaved by Pharaoh, who is the New World Order, and will become the Antichrist soon. Antichrist will emerge. And so you see the parallels there. Pharaoh's Egypt had them enslaved, working to build a great empire, the Egyptian empire. And the same thing is happening here. They keep us so busy that we cannot worship God and be devoted to God. In the book of Exodus, God spoke to Moses and told him, tell Pharaoh that I will hammer him with one disaster after another until he lets my people go into the wilderness so that they can worship me and not him. This was God's purpose, and God is doing the same thing right now. So
Yeah.
the book of Revelation is ancient book of Exodus, deja vu, all over again.
And what I see like when it comes to these control freaks who are at the buttons and switches for us here, I see a bunch of guys who are really men and women, I should say, who are role playing. It's like they want to be that all powerful Antichrist, and they're taking every step necessary to be that. And I'll say this, whether people believe that there's a Satan or not, or a devil or whatever you want to call him, one thing for myself I can't deny is that there has been real cases of demonic possession. And so there is an evil on the other side that is willing to take over your body, is willing to just really put people through hell, to say it lightly. I mean, I know of a couple of cases that were absolutely real. The woman wasn't nuts. She wasn't losing her mind. She wasn't on any crazy drugs. There was demonic activity in her home, and she had become possessed. And so you got to wonder, if you don't believe in a devil, you got to believe in that evil, because these things come from somewhere.
Well, just look at the evil that these men are perpetrating, the men in power. It's far greater and far more sophisticated than you would think that any human being could have. And the plan that they have is so the plan for world enslavement is so multifaceted, every front: education, the monetary system, the political system, the television, the brainwashing, mind control. All of this is such a highly complex system that you could say, well, yeah, these men were brilliant. But these men, again, they openly tell you that they worship Satan as their God. This is their declaration in their landmark book, Morals and Dogma Lines. And in the winds, too. So when you have ice build up and you have winds, that's when power lines come down. And it could be for a long period of time. In fact, the Weather Channel is warning that these power outages may last a long time. So when you feel the pain of it, it's not so easy to dismiss the threat or the reality that Earth is in trouble. It's quite easy to dismiss it when everything is going fine. But when you see the reality of the pain that's hitting us from all these weather disasters, then you begin to realize that, hey, it's time to wake up, time to get in motion, and time to prepare. That's my whole purpose, is trying to get people to prepare. I mean, why would I want to scare people just for the sake of scaring them? People watch horror movies for that reason, to be scared because they enjoy it. But that's not my purpose. That's not our purpose. We want to warn people. We care about people. Care about people protecting their lives and saving their lives. And that's why now they're beginning to realize that, yes, they have to get backup generators. They have to get solar panels. They have to start buying food, canned food. I mean, I've been stocking up. Fortunately, before Fukushima's nuclear disaster in Japan, I had stocked up on sardines and salmon. And so that's non-radioactive sardines and salmon, and the dates are still good. Yeah. Still, within the period of freshness where they're not expiring yet. So I was lucky. Same thing with, you can get cans of Vienna sausages, and I have a bunch of those in the basement too, and cans of white meat chicken. Well, that's the kind of the protein that people will need when things start going, and mainly it's power. When the power goes, That's when the stores get cleaned out, and everything, our fragile infrastructure, our web-like infrastructure of computers and delivery systems, just-in-time delivery systems, becomes disabled, actually. And nothing can be delivered to the stores. I mean, I was just watching the Weather Channel today. They showed a photograph of these huge long supermarket shelves cleaned out just from this one winter storm in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, that's what happens here. Is as soon as there's any mention of a snow flurry going to be in the air, and good luck finding bread or milk on any shelf.
Right, so that's why now, when there's no disaster, you've got to start buying dried. What I buy is amaranth. Amaranth is a wonderful grain from Peru, ancient grain from Peru, and that happens to be complete protein. You can get bags of dried amaranth. It's sort of like small beads, and not only amaranth, but there's dried millet and dried barley, dried lentils, dried split peas, very low cost, and those can be soaked for a period of time, and they get softened up without heat, partially softened anyway, so you can save fuel by soaking these grains and legumes in water for 12 or 15 hours. That's the kind of thing we have to start planning for. Plus sprouting seeds. I sprout seeds in a big jar. It's very easy to do. And the sprouts contain all the enzymes that the body needs to break down the foods and to digest them. Our bodies are depleted of enzymes because of our modern day false food that we're eating. So that's why our bodies cannot assimilate the carbohydrates and proteins and fats that we need to in order to keep the body strong and active. So these are all the things we have to start doing.
Yeah, there's so many chemicals that are added to the food. It's ridiculous. I was just talking about this last night with Autumn, and I was telling her, I was like, if you're going to a regular grocery store, practically everything you're getting has got
I think, and you just pull a cord and it fills up with CO2 or air. Could be a lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely can. Now, when we talk about the weather and how it's gone crazy, I mean, there's no question in the world that fashions haven't been tampering with geoengineering, and we know that certainly is a big part of it. But how much, in your opinion or in your research, has that factored in to the craziness we're seeing on this planet, and how much of it is off planet?
I've been faced with that question over the past several years as to who's causing or what's causing all this crazy severe weather. Is it man or is it God? And I've come to the conclusion, if you, spiritually speaking, when you pray and you study pray God's scriptures, not just study, because man cannot understand the symbolic mysteries of the Bible. But when you study, you realize that Satan is a real being, and the New World Order absolutely believes that Satan is their God. I mean, this is what they've stated in their books, that the Freemasons, the Illuminati, all the people who rule the world, that they get their power from Satan, who is the temporary ruler of this world. So if they believe that he exists, and the Bible tells us, and Jesus tells us that he does indeed exist, then you can realize that there's a battle going on between God and between Satan. And the men who manage and control the HAARP experiments, instrumentation and weaponry, scalar devices, all those kind of high technology weapons and equipment, those men are tend to trigger some of these natural disasters that are already to occur. And the way I analogize it is I often say that these disasters, Planet X is like Batman, and man's HAARP disasters are like Robin. So yeah, man is a minimal, weak trigger for some of the natural disasters that are already developing. And Satan wants to take the rob, and that Satan wants to take the credit for what Batman is really doing.
Yeah.
What Planet X is doing to this Earth.
And I just wanted to say that, you know, and with some of the higher uppers, when you get up to that top level of control, I mean, these people literally believe that they're going to become God by controlling the people, the weather, everything. Yeah.
Transhumanism, right? That there's a lot of talk about their transhumanist agenda, where they expect to live forever. And of course, this is part of the duel between God and Satan. God tells us that through his sacrifice that we can live forever. And Satan has given us a counterfeit promise that we can live forever through transhumanism. So it's all part of the dual battle between God and Satan. And it's the same thing with these natural disasters. Why would the New World Order want to take credit for all these disasters by giving us reason to believe that it was HAARP that caused this earthquake or that earthquake? Because as long as we the people fear HAARP and the government and the New World Order and the Illuminati, we will remain subservient to them and obedient. But once we realize that it's God bringing in Planet X, then people will fear God and turn their allegiance to God. Satan fears that. Satan hates that. So Satan wants to deceive us with the belief, and we know his.
John DiNardo, welcome back to Late Night in the Midlands.
Hello, Michael. I am pleased to be with you and your audience.
Well, I'm pleased to have you back. And, you know, I have certain guests who I try to get back as often as I can because, you know, I know you take your research serious, and therefore I take it serious, and I thank you.
You're welcome.
And so we've got these crazy weather patterns going on right now. I don't know where you would actually like to start.
Well, weather is a good place to start. I mean, that's some down-to-earth, pardon the pun, evidence of that something is definitely wrong with planet Earth. We see it in all sorts of weather phenomena, weather disasters, extreme cases of snow, heavy snow, record-breaking snow, in fact, and record-breaking cold. Particularly in the South, which has never, in our memorable history, experienced such cold weather. The South has been devastated because they never have such cold, icy, snowy weather, and the roads. The proof is that they don't have the salt trucks, they don't have the equipment to deal with this as the northern states do, and that's why the South has been particularly devastated. So there's evidence right there of historic, epic snow, cold, ice, etc. That has never occurred before. It's happening closer and closer to the equator. So Earth is in trouble. We look at floods. We've seen entire nations. I know it's easy to forget some of these disasters because they're not really highly publicized in the mass media. But if you look back, you'll recall that the entire nation of Pakistan was flooded out a few years ago. Virtually the entire nation was flooded out. And the entire nation of Australia, the continent, much of that was flooded out just a few years ago. We had floods all over the United States, and I know that people who live in those regions will never forget them. The epic floods in Texas, when Texas was basically floating away. Washington State, Louisville, Kentucky got flooded out very badly several times. Nashville, Grand Ole Opry was damaged heavily. Floods in every portion of the United States, really.
Oh yeah.
Storms, hurricanes that are huge, massive, large area hurricanes like Irene and Sandy. Typically, hurricanes cover a small area.
Look at the Philippines.
Like a bullet.
Look at the Philippines. What was that? 233 mile an hour winds.
Yeah, I mean, over 200 miles an hour. I mean, that has never been recorded before. So the weather itself is proving that something is wrong with planet Earth, because this has never happened before. We could go on and on. We could talk about, as you say, the winds, the drought, record droughts. I mean, I remember, and I followed the Weather Channel quite a bit, homes were so dry that the ground was cracking and the foundations of the houses were being destroyed because the ground was getting so dry, cracking and separating.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm. And here we've got we're about to get hit with an ice storm here in Columbia, South Carolina. So they're putting warnings out about power outages, and so preparing for that.
Right, and this is one reason we're seeing the reality of it hit home. We're feeling the pain of it. People in the South are going to have to deal with power outages. People up in where I live in New Jersey may very well have power outages due to the ice buildup on the trees and on the power